afternoon, and welcome to everybody joining us for this live Q&A about COVID vaccines and MS. My name's Freddie and I'm Policy Manager at the MS Society, and I'm really pleased that we have two neurologists joining us today, Dr. Emma Tallantyre and Dr. Waqar Rashid, who'll be answering your questions. So I'll introduce our guests properly in just a moment, but first, just a couple of technical points. If your stream stops working at any point, just try refreshing your browser and check the comments section for any updates, or return to either the main MS Society Facebook page or our YouTube page. And remember, you'll be able to watch this back. If you miss any of it or you want to watch it again, you'll be able to watch it back later. So we know that many people in the MS community have questions about the COVID vaccines, with the vaccine programme now underway across the UK. So we want to get through as many of your questions as we can today, but if we can't get through every question, don't worry. After the Q&A session, we'll be going through all of them and getting back to you in the comments. And do remember that our MS Helpline is there for you, and we have a lot of information on this topic on our website as well. So although we're unable to provide direct medical advice today, we hope we're able to answer some of your questions and that this aids you in discussions with your GP or MS team. So let's get started. We're really lucky to have Dr. Emma Tallantyre and Dr. Waqar Rashid with us today, who are both MS neurologists. Welcome to you both.
Thank you.
So we've already had some really great questions come through in the last few days. Please do add any other questions you might have during the session into the comments section on this live stream, and we'll get through as many as we can. Just a final reminder that you can find all the latest information about COVID vaccines and MS on our website, mssociety.org.uk, and you can also call our MS helpline if you do need support. So let's start with our first question. The first question is, are the COVID-19 vaccines safe for people with MS, or could they cause a relapse? And what about for people on DMTs? Perhaps, I don't know, Emma, if you'd like to start us off.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I think this is a really common question that people have been asking in the clinics, and obviously a really important one. So I think the main thing to say is that there's no reason to believe that any of the COVID-19 vaccines will be dangerous for people with MS. And that includes those people with MS who are taking an immune suppressive treatment, so a disease modifying therapy. We know that the vaccines work, and there's lots of high quality evidence that's from studies of other vaccines, not the COVID vaccine, but that we think will be applicable here, that they should not make your MS worse or provoke a relapse. It's also important to say that they shouldn't stop your DMT from working. And it's also important to say that these are not live vaccines, because obviously many people on certain treatments have been told that it's not safe to have a live vaccine. But again, I would just re-emphasize the point that all of the COVID vaccines that are being provided are not live vaccines in that sense.
Great. Waqar, do you have anything to add to that?
Thank you. I couldn't agree more. I hope you can hear me with my dodgy microphone, but I absolutely agree. I think in terms of, there's two aspects to the question. Is safety? Yes, absolutely. We don't have any data, and there shouldn't be any theoretical data to suggest any risk really to people with MS. And the second thing is about efficacy, and time will tell as to what degree of reduced efficacy there may or may not be with certain DMTs, but one would still think that the benefits overall in having a vaccine outweighs any risk, and that even partial protection would still be very, very important to people.
Thank you both for that. So that takes us on to very much a related second question, which is very common. Will the COVID vaccines work for people with MS, including those on different DMTs? Will they actually be effective? Waqar, would you maybe like to carry on with that theme?
Obviously, we've heard figures for the various vaccines of approaching about 90% in the average population. And that should still be the same really for the vast majority of people with MS. Certainly we would expect that figure to be the same and comparable with people who are not on DMTs, but who have MS. So I always say to people, who have MS that outside of the issue of the regulation of the immune system within the brain and spinal cord, their immune systems are still working very well. And so I would expect them to make very good responses to the vaccine, similar to people who don't have MS. Obviously, there is some variation in people who are on immunosuppressants, DMTs, and in particular, those would be Ocrevus and Mavenclad, Fingolimod and Lemtrada. But as Emma's already said, we would still expect there to be good responses, particularly if the timing, and I'm sure we'll come on to that, the timing is carefully done so that it would still be highly likely that people form a good response to the vaccine.
Thanks. Anything to add to that, Emma?
Yeah, no, I think that's right. And I think, as Waqar said, a lot of the data around efficacy hinges around this percentage of infections that were prevented. And, you hear statistics like 90%, but it's really important to also look at the proportion of hospital admissions in the, treatment arms of the vaccine trial. And even the ones that had, you might say, not such impressive efficacy data, they still prevented, the overwhelming majority of any admissions to hospital. So the few infections that were seen in the vaccine arms were, less severe and so on. So I think it's really important to kind of outline the benefit that people can stand to get from these vaccines.
Great, thank you for that. So another question we've been asked since we announced our Q&A today is, which COVID-19 vaccine is best for people with MS? And should I be waiting for a particular one to be made available?
Sure. Did you want me to answer that one, Freddie? I mean, I think that the important thing to say is that there really isn't much comparative data about the two vaccines. And I think people even outside of those with MS will be saying, would it be better to wait for a certain one, or should I be requesting a certain vaccine? I think the point to make is that, getting the vaccine in a timely way is important. And I think the other point I would come back to is that not only did all of the vaccines that have been approved show a significant improvement in the number of COVID infections, but they also showed, a significant improvement in the number of severe infections, and otherwise, in other words, those resulting in hospitalization. So I think for people with MS, we're not focusing too much on which vaccine they receive, but it's more about receiving the vaccine in a timely way.
Thanks, Emily. There has been a lot of questions on that. So moving on then to another question we've had is people asking about when they should get the vaccine. That's obviously a burning question. In particular, it's what should people do if they're in a priority group, but they haven't yet been contacted? What would the advice be? Waqar, would you like to start on that one?
Yeah, so the vast majority of people with MS will probably be in the priority group 6, which is people who've got an underlying condition, but there will be some people who are in priority group 4 based on other comorbidities or potentially other medications. So it's important to clarify both with the specialist team, but also with the general practitioner as well, as to where the priority group will lie. The specialist team particularly need to know if the person's on a disease-modifying therapy, which is obviously being administered at the hospital, particularly in infusion-based therapy, so that because that might be quite important in terms of the timing of the infusions. And so your GP should know which priority group you're in, whether it's 6 or 4, and I would suggest liaison with your specialist team, particularly if you're on an infusion disease-modifying therapy, so that they're aware of the timing, and so if there is any adjustment that is necessary. So what I'm talking about mainly is Ocrevus and Lemtrada, but also Mavenclad as well would be the ones that particularly there is a timing issue based on the vaccine.
Thanks for that. I know there will be many questions about specific DMTs that no doubt we'll get onto it in a bit, but that's a really important message to be clear about where you are in that priority group. So we've had a few questions about the possibility of side effects, and from a COVID vaccine and how these might affect their MS symptoms. Emma, do you want to sort of start on what we know, if anything, about possible side effects?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think in general, in the trials of the COVID vaccines, many of the side effects are those that you'd expect after any vaccine. But they did include some side effects which could be similar to symptoms experienced by people with MS, so including fatigue, for example. So I think that's something to be aware of. And we know that sometimes around vaccines or around infections, there can be a sort of recurrence of old symptoms of MS, a sort of pseudo exacerbation, and so on. So I think those are the sorts of things for people to be aware of. And as we've said, although there's no suspicion at this point that COVID vaccines are likely to increase the chance of relapse, it's obviously something that will be monitored. But at this point in time, it's certainly not a reason to prevent people from MS from accepting the vaccine.
Thank you, Emma. Waqar, would you have anything to add to that? People who might be concerned and what they might.
Sure, no, I absolutely agree with Emma. I think it's important to remember as well that we've kind of gone through, to some degree, a similar sort of process with other vaccines as they've come to use as well, with concern that could they cause relapses, and with further long-term analysis, it's never really been shown to be the case. And I hope that's reassuring. It shouldn't be the case neither, because, as I say, the issue with MS is predominantly an issue with the regulation of the immune system within the brain and spinal cord. People's immune system outside the brain and spinal cord really does work still absolutely normally, and so one wouldn't expect the limited exposure that is given with the vaccines to trigger a significant relapse. Absolutely, as Emma says, can feel fatigue, may get some recurrence of known symptoms. I would just suggest that people rest after they've had the vaccine for 24, 48 hours, however long they feel they need to, and any of those symptoms should pass.
Thanks for that. That's really helpful. So probably won't be surprised to hear that a few people have been expressing concern that the vaccine was developed so quickly. It's been remarkably fast. So people are wondering, is it really safe given how quickly it's been developed? That's quite a common question coming through. Would you say anything on that in terms of the process and how it has been developed so fast and made available so quickly?
Is that to myself? Yeah, sure. I actually don't think it has been developed that quickly, because we kind of already knew a lot about this particular virus. So coronaviruses have been around for many, many years in one shape or form, and there's a lot of similarity with COVID-2, SARS-CoV-2, with SARS-CoV-1 and other coronaviruses. So it actually didn't surprise me that much that we have a vaccine, several vaccines that are available now, because as you can imagine, there was a huge international process with lots of competing companies devoting a huge amount of resource to this, but also we weren't starting at a point of zero. There was a lot that we already knew about this virus, and so I think that's been immensely helpful. So to my mind, I'm not concerned, because it actually made sense to me that the vaccine came along at the timing it did come along. That's my opinion.
Thanks for that. And I think, related to that, Emma, another question we've had is, people have asked why this vaccine can be developed so quickly compared to MS research, treatments for MS, and people are desperate for those and wondering why they're taking perhaps longer than this vaccine.
Yeah, I mean, I can absolutely sympathise with that view. I mean, I'd really echo what Waqar said just now about I wouldn't want people to be worried about the robustness of the safety of the vaccine because of the speed at which it's seemingly come to the kind of healthcare profession, if you like. I mean, I think that, the regulators are incredibly stringent in the way that they approve medications and give them a license. And I don't think that process was any less stringent for this. I think, as Waqar said, it's the sort of fact that the science was already very much, for these vectors, as you'd call them, the kind of vehicles that you can deliver a vaccine with. The science behind that was already very well established before the COVID-19 pandemic started. So it allowed the vaccines to be very quickly developed. Also, the manufacture was upscaled at a very early stage, despite the fact that the efficacy data wasn't yet available, and that was a bit of a risk, but it was a risk that people were willing to take, and so on. And I think that, the huge sort of public health crisis that we were facing with COVID meant that a huge amount of sort of resource, huge platform trials and so on were set up at great pace. So I think, yes, it is frustrating to think that why can't that same approach simply be taken in MS? And of course, the reason is because of, there being many, many other conditions, MS being one, where there's still a lot to be done, I suppose. But I think on a positive, I would say that actually lessons have been learned. So, already, even before these kind of impressive trials for the vaccine launched and completed, as an example, there's a multi-arm, multi-phase trial that's due to start this year. I'm looking at therapies in progressive MS that shares a lot of the sort of sophistication of the platform trials that we'd like to see in the future to stop those kind of hold-ups in advancing science. And I think, apart from that, other lessons will be learned from the sort of speed at which COVID vaccines have been brought to the market, if you like. And hopefully they will benefit people with MS in a sort of indirect way.
I think that's really positive, isn't it? Think about the learnings and how they...
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I think it's a really important point. Directly in terms of some of the technologies and some of the safety data we'll get back from the vaccine, I think could help people with MS, but also indirectly in terms of seeing how, when there is collaboration, how things can move. I think that's a very positive thing.
Brilliant. Yes, I know our research team are also excited about the possibilities. So just moving on then to the next question is, a lot of people asking whether COVID vaccines would make them more susceptible to getting COVID more than once. So I think that's sort of a question around, how vaccines work, I guess. Emma, would you like to start with that one? Will the vaccine make them more susceptible to getting COVID more than once?
No, I mean, I think the short answer would be no. The immunity that people develop in response to a vaccine is significant. And actually, interestingly, speaking to our immunologists recently, who've been working on some of the COVID serology tests, they say that the number of antibodies people get in response to a vaccine is about tenfold the number that they're seeing in people that have had the COVID infection. And, you can't extrapolate that clinically yet. That sort of efficacy kind of comparison will come out in the fullness of time, but it suggests to me that the vaccine will be very effective at preventing future COVID infections. There are questions being asked at the minute about the new variants of COVID that we're seeing circulating, but I think the point is that the vaccine technology is there, and we're told that that means that we'll be able to be very responsive to changes, mutations in the virus, and it's likely that vaccine programs for COVID may be seasonal then, and that new vaccines will be available this winter that will have taken into account any mutations and any variants that have come into the population since then. So I think it's very sensible for people to go and get the vaccine that's currently available. And I think people should feel quite reassured in terms of future infection, both because this vaccine is likely to be very effective, but also because future vaccines are likely to take into account any changes in the virus that might occur.
Do you have anything to add to that, Waqar? Would you agree?
Yeah, no, I think absolutely. I think in terms of reinfection, as I said, we're likely to get more cross immunity from the vaccine than having COVID as an infection clinically. And so I think it's more likely that people will get reinfected with new variants of COVID had they not had the vaccine, but had a previous version of COVID previously rather than the vaccine. So I think they're reducing the chances actually of getting reinfection by having the vaccine than not having the vaccine. Can't guarantee it, obviously, but it's one has to monitor this carefully.
Thank you for that. So next question, people asking about carers. People are wondering, when will carers be offered vaccination? And I assume this question relates to unpaid carers, your family and friends, who may be living with people with MS. So the question is, when are they going to be offered the vaccine? Will it be at the same time as people with MS whenever they are also offered the vaccine? Emma, Waqar, would you like to start?
Yeah, I think it's unclear in one or two. Obviously, people who were the carers or people in care homes, so just in terms of age and mobility in that way, had earlier access. But in terms of, say, somebody who's got MS, who's in group 6, for instance, and their carer, as you say, unpaid carer, so whether it be a family member or so forth, who perhaps is under the age of 60 or 65, whether they can get accelerated up. I don't think, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think there's any additional provision for that. I think what would be, a useful thing, particularly if that person is clinically extremely vulnerable, so if somebody who's in group 4, is that they have some kind of, and so the care is shielding with that person, is that they discuss this issue with their GP, because then there is potentially, I believe, some flexibility around that. But it's a thorny issue. It comes into other potential priority groups, because the issue is this: is obviously somebody who is in group 4 has the vaccine, but potentially may still, as a family group, need to shield because of the risk of infection still coming in. But hopefully over time that does settle down. But how prioritised the carer can be if they're not an official carer, I'm not sure about that. And as I say, I do suggest that they speak to the general practitioner about this.
Yeah, thanks for that. I would say we've got some more information on our website about that as well, and the place of unpaid carers in the priority list. Emma, did you want to add anything on that one?
Yeah, I mean, my reading of the priority groups is that they should be in group 6. So unpaid carers of people with underlying health conditions should be treated just like the person with the underlying health condition. But I think what I'm less certain about is how that will take place, because obviously the general practitioners have a list of people with the health conditions, but it may be that those individuals need to make it clear who is their unpaid carer, and they should be eligible for vaccination in the same priority group, was my understanding.
Yeah, I think that's a live topic of discussion in government, etc., at the moment, of exactly how to identify different groups.
Yeah.
And it's important to, if you are an unpaid carer, to make yourself known to your GP as such. Is the advice we've been giving at the moment. So thanks for that. Moving on to some more detailed questions about particular treatments and how they relate to the vaccine, as we touched on earlier. So I guess the key question here is, people are asking, should I delay my disease modifying treatment before getting the vaccine? So should I be delaying my treatment in order to have the vaccine? We've had someone who isn't on a DMT yet and isn't sure whether they should be waiting until their treatment, start their treatment until after they've had the vaccine. Emma, would you like to start with that one?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are probably a couple of important points to make. The first is that there are probably slightly different recommendations. So we spoke a lot behind the scenes as medical advisors to the MS Society about this. And I think there's probably a slight difference between someone who's not yet on a treatment, who's due to embark on a treatment, versus someone who's already established on disease modifying therapy. And the advice that we gave as medical advisors was that overall, it would not generally be advisable for people on DMT already to substantially alter their treatment, and particularly it would not be advisable for them to stop treatment in order to get a vaccine. And that's mainly because of the durable effect of these disease modifying therapies, so that once you're on one, it's not really clear how long you would need to pause treatment or stop treatment before you could expect a change in the way your body mounted an immune response to vaccination. So I think the key message here is to say that it will generally not be beneficial to people to stop, sort of interrupt or change the schedule of their treatment. I think if you were about to start a disease-modifying therapy, then it is a conversation to have with your neurologist, because it depends a little bit on your individual situation. So, for example, how active your MS is and what might be the risk of delaying treatment for you in terms of experiencing new MS activity, versus how quickly you and your neurologist think you're likely to be able to get the vaccine. And that's obviously very individual. So I think someone who's about to start on treatment, that's probably an individual discussion you need to have. So Waqar mentioned before that while we're sending a message that really it's not sensible to start interrupting treatment in order to give vaccines, there may be some individual advice that's given to people on certain cell depleting therapies. And that's because things like Ocrevus, alemtuzumab, and cladribine act in a way where you have a treatment and there's a period of cell depletion and then a period of recovery of your cells. And it's really not clear whether there would be any advantage in timing the vaccine at a certain stage in that cycle, but there's certainly some kind of scientific rationale that might lead a neurologist to say, look, if you had the choice, I might wait until this time point. So as an example, for both cladribine and alemtuzumab, there's some suggestion that you might be benefited in waiting until you're a little bit further from your most recent treatment so that your cells have had a chance to repopulate and come back into the circulation and mount an immune response. But I have to say that that isn't really based on evidence. It's just based on a sort of scientific rationale. I don't know if Waqar, you'd have anything to add to that.
It's a difficult area, and you know, having the 12-week gap between the two doses as well does lengthen the timescale. So, as you say, Emma, really, I think there's two groups. It's people who are about to start on immune depleting therapies, so particularly Ocrevus, Mavenclad, Lemtrada, and Fingolimod. It's having a discussion with the neurologist and neuroscience units and the MS team there about the timing of it. And I think, you know, then on an individual basis, weighing up the pros and cons about the timing of the vaccine and the therapies. And then in those who are on, particularly it is based particularly on the infusion therapies and Mavenclad, so Lemtrada, and Ocrevus and Mavenclad, not so much an issue with Tysabri, is then looking at gaps between treatment, and is there an opportunity between the courses to get the vaccine in and effective before having the next course. It may be that there is a degree of tweaking of the timing, but again, it's something we wouldn't want. It's a balance of a risk of extending intervals between timing of treatments and obviously timing of getting the vaccine. And again, it's something if people are concerned to speak with their neuroscience units about. A lot of neuroscience units are sending out information as well to individual people, and obviously there's a great bit of detail on the MS Society website about this as well.
Thanks both. Yeah, it's a very detailed area and a lot to say on that. So I would recommend looking at the information on our website where the medical advisors have set out of our understanding for each DMT. But obviously some of this requires a conversation with your MS team, as we've said. So thanks for that. I think another thing that's coming through is people really wanting to understand where they are on this priority list, which I know we touched on, and you know, where would people's MS affect where they are on this list? Because there's lots of reasons for being on the list according to age and other things. So would you be able to just sort of give us the headlines of where people with MS might be expected to be vaccinated?
Yeah, so it's in terms of there's several issues. So obviously MS is one issue. Other comorbidity is another issue, and age. With comorbidity, other medications somebody may be on, and then age is the other issue. Now, if somebody's 70 or above, that would automatically push them up to a higher priority list of 4 or above, depending on the age. So regardless of the MS, would push them into a higher category. And so already, particularly someone who's over 70, I would imagine they should now have been invited to have had, may already have had the vaccine. In somebody who's got MS as well, they would be considered in 70 and above to be clinically extremely vulnerable. There is also an aspect of disability as well, which so someone who is wheelchair bound or has extremely poor mobility, such that we measure on an EDSS, but essentially requiring a wheelchair in terms of mobility. Again, they should, if they haven't been invited, been told they're clinically extremely vulnerable by their GP or specialist team, they should contact their GP to clarify with this, to make sure that they are noted as being clinically extremely vulnerable, and so in class 4 of the vaccination priority list. The bulk of people with MS are going to be under the age of 70 and less disabled than that. To a large degree, and so will more likely be in the group 6. There is 1 or 2 caveats in terms of disease-modifying therapies, or certain disease-modifying therapies, and timing of disease-modifying therapies. This is particularly true of people about to embark on, as we were talking about a few moments ago, certain disease-modifying therapies, immune depleters, and so again, as we've just mentioned, is to speak with their neuroscience team to ensure that they have earlier access to the vaccine, and they may well be able to go into group 4 rather than 6 of that. Otherwise, the vast majority of people, so people who are under the age of 70, who have less disability and on other disease-modifying therapies and have no other comorbidity or on other immunosuppressant drugs, should be in category 6. It's a complex area, but that's broadly a summary of it.
Yeah, thank you for that. Yeah, it's a complex one. And I guess I would just add that the government have stated their intention is to try and get through the first 4 priority groups by mid-February.
Yes.
So in terms of timing, that's sort of the expectation at the moment. So just moving on, we're getting through lots of questions here, which is brilliant. So thank you both. Fire another one at you, Emma. I've got a question here about what are the vaccines made of, particularly people with allergies and other reasons why they might not want to take something with certain ingredients. So, you know, someone said they've heard that if you're allergic to penicillin, you might have an allergic reaction to these vaccines. And is that the case? And would that affect someone's MS?
So, I mean, the main thing to say about allergy is that for one of the vaccines, there's been something put on the label. I understand that if you've ever had anaphylaxis, which is a really severe allergic reaction, where you've needed sort of not just antihistamines, but kind of treatment in hospital because you've had swelling of the airway and so on, that you should avoid one of the COVID vaccines. So I think it is definitely worth, again, it's something which your GP should have on your records if you've ever had anaphylaxis, as it's called. For people that have milder allergies, there shouldn't be any reason for them not to receive any one of the COVID vaccines, but just that caveat that if anyone's ever had a very severe allergic reaction, which has resulted in admission to hospital and need for emergency care, then they ought to just be aware of that when their GP is selecting which COVID vaccine is most appropriate.
I think to add to that, obviously the penicillin issue is an unrelated issue. There's no common component or constituent of penicillin with the vaccine as such, so they shouldn't. If it's a specific allergy to penicillin alone, obviously they should make the vaccinators aware of that. But I believe it's the Pfizer vaccine, wasn't it, which there was the initial anaphylaxis concern about rather than the AstraZeneca one.
Yeah, thank you for that. That's really helpful to know. So just moving on then, we've also had a question through about whether people should be taking the vaccine if they're currently having a relapse, which I know is something we were discussing before the call. Emma, would you like to start us off on that one?
Yeah, well, when we discussed this question before the call, I mean, I think we agree that this is an area of uncertainty. I think the way that I would approach it is that normally when you're invited for a vaccine, the person vaccinating you wants to know that you're in good health. So for instance, if you're currently experiencing an infection, as an example, they would probably want to see that be improving before they give you the vaccine. And some of the questions that you're asked when you attend for either flu jab or COVID vaccine will be around that. So although we haven't got any specific recommendations about this scenario of what to do if you're currently experiencing an MS relapse, I would probably apply the same logic and say that it would be good to know that that was improving at least before you had the vaccine. And that's partly just being pragmatic because of the reasons we said before, that some of the side effects of any vaccine can be that it can cause a bit of fatigue and non-specific sort of unwellness for a couple of days, and that in people with MS it can sometimes bring back some older symptoms for a few days. So I think it would make sense to me for people to feel that generally their health was in a decent place at the time of having the vaccine. I don't know, Waqar, if you've got any other thoughts on that.
No, I think that's right. I think if obviously if somebody's in the midst of quite significant and severe relapse, they probably would want to wait a little bit just to start to have that stabilised before potentially making themselves feel more tired and with that extra strain. It shouldn't, there's no evidence though to suggest that it should deepen or worsen the relapse permanently or anything like that. It's just, as you say, a pragmatic decision just to say, well, look, I'll start to deal with the relapse first and then look at the vaccine after that.
Thanks both for that. Yeah, there's some unknowns remain, but that's really useful. We've got 5 minutes left, so just time for one or two more questions. Time's gone very quickly. So a really important one is around what people should do if they haven't heard yet from the NHS about getting the vaccine. I know we talked about this earlier, but I think something helpful to reiterate, you know, what should people do given they might be at different points in the priority list depending on lots of factors. If they're at home today wondering when they're going to get it, what should they do?
I think firstly, you shouldn't worry. Particularly, as I say, I think the majority of people with MS are likely to be in category 6. And so it's still going to be a little period of time before they're going to be invited by their GP. So if they're otherwise well and not on any other immunosuppressant medication and on sort of standard first line disease modifying therapies, then it's highly likely they're in category 6. And there is a bit of variation across the country. Some areas are a little bit further ahead than other areas. As I say, if they're concerned, I want to make sure, clarify then the GP practice should be able to provide them with that information as to which category they're in.
That's really helpful. And I know that, as we said earlier, the ambition is to get through the 4 groups by mid-February. So I think what we've been advised by government is if people haven't heard by then and believe that they should have, that's a good time to contact your GP. And as we've also said, if you think you might be clinically extremely vulnerable, but you haven't maybe received a shielding letter, but you think you should have, that's also a discussion to have with your GP. Brilliant. So we haven't got much time left. So thank you both so much. And I wondered if in summary, you could just kind of give us what would be the key message you'd like people with MS to take away from this today about COVID vaccines. Emma, would you have any words in reflection of that?
Sure, yeah. I mean, I think the main message from me would be really a very encouraging one, both about the safety and the effectiveness of the vaccines. I think that we've all very much had our lives on hold in the last year, and I think that people with MS should feel as confident as everybody else in the population that when they're offered a vaccine, they should feel confident about having it in terms of safety. and that the majority of people with multiple sclerosis will mount a good immune response and will therefore get some benefit from having the vaccine. There are some questions over people on particular disease modifying therapies. My personal opinion is that even people on some of these quite aggressive cell depleting disease modifying therapies are still likely to get more benefit from having the vaccine than not having the vaccine. So I think that would be my message.
Thanks, Emma. Waqar, would you add anything to that?
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. And I think, people with MS, certainly the people I've spoken to, whether it's in clinic or elsewhere, have been overwhelmingly positive, I think, about having the vaccine. Obviously very used to with the flu vaccine, being offered vaccines, and I think it recognised its importance, obviously a huge importance across the general population, but also specifically to people with other illnesses like MS, because of the additional issue and harm that serious infection can cause. So, absolutely encourage people to find out any other questions they've got. But, I said to be assured that this isn't any different really to any of the other vaccines that have been offered and have been taken in the past.
Yeah. Brilliant. Great. Well, thank you so much. We're just about out of time with a minute left. So I will just sum up and say thank you so much. There's been some messages of thanks coming in from people watching this. So I hope everyone's found it as useful as I did. I know that there have been a lot of questions, so anything that hasn't been addressed, we'll be doing our very best to respond to that in the comments just after this. And remember, if you missed any of it, you can watch it back, and that should be available shortly. And finally, any one that needs support or more information, the details of our helpline are on our website, mssociety.org.uk/helpline. And do look at those information pages that we've mentioned today for kind of lots of detailed information about this. So thank you so much to Emma and Waqar for joining us. It's been incredibly helpful. And thanks to everyone, and take care. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.